ships, the longest one was 100 feet. Now, you and I have been to sea. We know how big the Atlantic Ocean is, and we know how tall those waves can get. You got to be out of your mind to think you're going to go to sea in one of those things. I mean, it's just insane. What'd you find? Did you find anything?
I did.
And?
He wasn't.
Huh.
On drugs.
Okay. I stand corrected.
Okay.
Anyway.
So, runners-up, Nick. Runners up
would be Elon Musk. And
so Elon Musk and his
space program.
Okay.
And the other, if I had to pick another one, I would probably say the California wildfires.
Oh, okay. There's one that never entered into my mind.
Because those were 50% of them were caused by faulty equipment. Some of those transformers were 100 years old.
Right.
Should be in museums, not powering a modern power grid.
Right.
So those two stories, I think, did not get the credit they deserved. Certainly, in the second one, there were some very socio-political reasons why they didn't get the coverage they deserved, because there were purposes at large that weren't served by promoting those stories. In other words, the green agenda. If people found out that these were not caused by climate change, but in fact caused because we were pursuing climate change in California, I forget what the statewide provider of gas and energy is. PE&G. I knew it was something like that.
Pacific Electric and Gas.
That's it. Okay. They were pouring all their money into solar and wind and weren't putting any into upkeeping of infrastructure. Therefore, the infrastructure began to fail, and you saw all these wildfires. They didn't want that story getting out. They liked the wind and solar. They didn't like the fires. So those are, I would have to say, my two honorable mentions.
Okay.
As far as stories that didn't get the attention they deserved.
So what's your so let me give you my honorable mentions.
Please
okay?
do.
And my honorable mentions actually were fairly large stories. I don't know if they got covered that well. Well, yeah, I guess maybe they did. But I didn't care, okay, because they're not my top stories anyway. So for me, I'm going to give you three honorable mentions.
Okay.
The first one, I have to say, is the outbreak of peace in the Middle East. I think it's 4 countries now, 4 Arab countries.
Yes, very good. Very good choice.
In addition to Jordan and Egypt, who already had peace treaties with Israel, now Morocco, United Arab Emirates,
yep, Sudan,
and now the fourth one escapes my
Qatar. Was it Qatar?
No, I don't. It might have been, but I don't recall.
Okay, well, it's a country over in that corner anyway.
In that region. So, or is it Saudi Arabia?
I always thought they kind of had a quasi-peace deal between them anyway.
Well, there's been a lot of collaboration between Israel and a number of the Arab states already, but no formal agreements.
Okay.
So, and of course, peripheral to these peace deals was the fact that the United States, after decades of promising to do it, finally moved its embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem.
Oh, yeah.
Basically recognizing that Jerusalem was the capital of Israel. So, okay, so that wrapped up peace in the Middle East, or progress towards comprehensive peace in the Middle East, I think has to have an honorable mention. The second one I wanted to mention, okay, which I thought, has been a big story, but has been sort of subsumed by this whole COVID pandemic business in the U.S. election, is Brexit. The fact that
that's right,
that the British are now, the United Kingdom, I should say, are exiting, had voted to leave the European Union, the first country to do so, possibly not the last, and they had voted to leave. They left officially the European Union last January 1st or December 31st, and they had a year to negotiate, an interim period to negotiate a full trade agreement with the European Union between the two entities, which, of course, was, like these things, sometimes comes down to the wire, and they just signed an agreement a few days ago.
Yeah, I saw Nigel Farage talking about that.
And the UK Parliament, I believe it was just today or yesterday, approved the agreement. So not everybody is happy with all of the provisions, but that's the nature of these kinds of big comprehensive deals, is that, there's give and take, and some sectors of the economy are going to be ecstatic, and some sectors of the economy are going to be, not very happy, and most people are going to go, ho-hum, is that what this was all about? It really hasn't affected my life one way or the other. But I think it's a big deal. I think it's a really big deal that any country, but a country of the size and stature of the United Kingdom, would decide through a referendum. Now, this was not the government that decided to do this. This was a referendum where the people voted and they said, you know what, we've had it with the European Brussels bureaucracy.
Yep.
The foolishness of these guys, the over-bureaucracy of them, the trying to impose all kinds of regulations, and we want to retake our country. We want to take our country back from the Brussels bureaucrats. And so that's what they did. They voted in a referendum to leave. It was a bruising, and I followed the fight quite closely.
Right.
Brought down two prime ministers, David Cameron. Well, no, Brown was already voted out of office before.
Oh,
Brown
was he?
was prime minister. He was the Labour prime minister before Cameron came in. Theresa May.
That's right.
So Boris Johnson, of course, is now the prime minister. But that was a very bruising battle. I mean, I had never seen. I'm a student of Parliament and parliamentary procedure, and it interests me greatly. I was watching the debates, watching the voting and that, and I had never seen any Parliament act in the way it was acting in the lead up to this, and eventually Johnson became the prime minister. They had a general election. He was returned with a larger majority, and as they say, the rest is history. So I think that is a story that has gone underreported, although that's not my criteria, but I think it was a big story that was underreported, got lost again in the whole thing about the pandemic and the U.S. election. And I have a third one, Nick.
Just before you get into the third one, the country you were looking for was United Arab Emirates.
United Arab Emirates. Okay.
Go ahead.
The third one, and I'm just watching the time here, the third honorable mention that I've come up with is, and I know you'll appreciate this, is the Chinese crackdown in Hong Kong. And,
yes.
Which would have been, it would have captured people's attention immensely if not for the pandemic and if not for the U.S. election. It's a big deal where the Communist Chinese government has been violating all of its undertakings, left, right, and center, that were part of the agreement for the British, it was a colony, to hand over the colony of Hong Kong to China. And in fairness to the Chinese, there was an agreement already in place. It was a 99-year lease, I believe it was.
Yeah.
So there were some legal obligations for the British to hand it over, but in doing so, they recognized the fact that there were going to be problems with a free society and a free economy, as Hong Kong has been for as long as it's been under British rule, and what would it be under communist rule? And the government in China made several undertakings as part of the exit agreement, and now they seem to be violating all of these things. And in a bigger sort of sense, not just the Hong Kong picture, but the whole aggressiveness and aggressive expansion of communist Chinese influence in Southeast Asia. So Hong Kong is a sort of a canary in the mine, if you will. And the reason I choose that, and that would be my top runner-up, is because I think that's an ongoing story. I don't know where it's going to go, but I could see trouble brewing in Southeast Asia as a consequence of that.
When you mentioned, this would have captured the imagination of the world, captured the attention, maybe not the imagination, but the attention of the world, if it wasn't for the coronavirus. You're absolutely right, because it certainly did back in 1989 in Tiananmen Square.
Right.
The whole world watched that.
And was horrified.
And as we should have been. And it's basically, yes, they have a new prime minister or president or whatever the heck they call him over there, Xi Ping or something like that.
Something like that.
So they have a new guy at the top, but the infrastructure, the Communist Party, is the same animal. All it wants to do is devour its neighbors and control for those he can't reach directly, he wants to control them economically. That's the Chinese plan in a nutshell. That's they're now saying that who was it? Was it Trump was saying that they can't have any influence over the election of the new Dalai Lama, and China's all upset because they say the Dalai Lama's a separatist? Well, Tibet was never part of China until the communist Chinese took it over. I mean, to say they're a separatist, yeah, that's like saying Poland was a separatist from Russia at the end of the Cold War. Well, of course it was. It was its own nation. So, these kind of things, this is the kind of stuff that gets people's attention, as it should.
Okay, we're going to go for a break, and whether you're listening to us live or you're listening to the podcast, we're going to carry on afterwards, because we've only been talking about the runners-up, but I want to get into what our winners are and why we've chosen the winners for the top news story of 2020. Where has the time gone, Nick? I'm telling you. Okay, so as I say, we'll be back in a few minutes here on the Nick and Joe Show on ThinkRadio.ca. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Joe. He's Nick, and you are listening to the Nick and Joe Show, coming to you live from the Think Radio Broadcast Centre in Canada's National Capital. And we are talking about the stories that have been in the news this year, sort of the year 2020 in review. And we were in the last segment just discussing our runners-up stories. When we started talking about them and revealing what our lists were, I think we were both going, oh, yeah, forgot all about that one. And they're all big stories.
Yeah.
And if it wasn't for COVID-19 and it wasn't for the U.S. election and the run-up to the U.S. election and everything that's gone on around that, these would be stories that everybody would be talking about, for those of you out there who pay attention to current events. So there you go. So Nick, I'm gonna reveal what I think was my top story, but I'm gonna cheat a little bit, okay? Because I know I said nothing to do with the pandemic or anything, but there was one breaking story that I thought was worth mentioning, and if this would have been my top story for 2020. If we didn't have the pandemic roll.
Okay.
And it's only peripherally related to the pandemic. And I want to mention it as a final runner-up, okay? It's a breaking story out of Spain. And that is that the Spanish government has announced and is starting now to register the names of citizens who refuse or decline to get vaccinated with one of the new COVID-19 vaccines that are out there, and they're just keeping a registry, And when I was reading the story, this was just breaking news today, by the way, but I think this is huge, huge news.
Yep.
Because this is something that we've been concerned about. And